great start. All right, Cliff Taylor's going to lead us in applause. Rick Atkinson gave, I think, a great talk, a great summation, meaning of the war, and we're going to continue this now. We're going to bring this war in this afternoon panel down to a very personal, intense level, because Colonel Ralph Hauenstein played, as you know, I think everybody in this room knows that he played such a significant role in the war, and we honor him for that. As director of the Hauenstein Center for Presidential Studies at Grand Valley, I am so honored to be able to carry forward Ralph's legacy of leadership and service. Our format this afternoon is going to be pretty straightforward. I've had the opportunity to interview Ralph for about 15 hours on camera, and what we've decided to do is show all 15 hours to you right now. We're going to see who's left standing at the end of this. We are taking we have 5 brief clips that we would like to show you, so you'll all be out in about 6 minutes. And what we're going to do is provide bridge stories. So we're going to show a clip, provide a story or two. Rick will weigh in with his insights, show another clip of Ralph in interview, provide a story, Rick will respond. And that's what we propose to do over the next 50 minutes or so. So with that, what I'd like to do is start with the first clip, please.
It was kind of a tenuous thing, because at that time Iceland was the focal point of a great deal of news, because here we were not in war and we were going up into a combat zone of the war in Europe. And accordingly, all of the newspapers, including the New York Times and the AP, UP, and INS and so forth, had their reporters up there. So we had quite a large contingent of news people. And suddenly we got a call one day that we hadn't been up there only about 2 months, I guess. And I got a call that an emergency from the Navy that the German submarines had torpedoed the USS Kearney, which is a destroyer, American destroyer. And the general called me in and said that we better get out there and take a look at it. But it was a bit of a problem. How are we going to get out there and look at it, with the submarines around there? So what we did, we went down and got the chief of police, and he gave us a Icelandic fishing trawler, so that the Germans wouldn't shoot at an Icelandic fishing trawler, And I went out there, and the Kearney was indeed, it was badly damaged, with several casualties, Americans killed on board the destroyer. I came back to the base at Iceland, and the problem was, how do we keep this from the newspapermen? Because this means it's an act of war, and we're not in war. So we tried to keep it as much as we could within ourselves and get all the information back to Washington and let them make the decisions of how they wanted to handle it. And it was successful that we did that. The newspaper people, of course, were unhappy at the fact that we didn't give them the news, but it was a very tenuous time, because it could have been something that we could have made big stories out of it, and maybe arouse the American people that here the Germans are sinking our warships,
First clip shows that the United States is already in a war zone before Pearl Harbor. And very few Americans know this part of Ralph's story, or the story of our country in this way. And Ralph, what I would like to do is begin by asking you about the Iceland operation, how we got involved, how you got involved.
Well, I was back in 1941. I had been called into service back in 1940. I think most of you were probably in service at that time yourself. But of some sort. In any event, I was assigned to Fort Sheridan as the intelligence officer. Originally, I was to have been a public relations officer, because my background had been, as you know, a city editor of a newspaper, and been a commissioned officer. And when I reported for duty, I found out that the intelligence and public relations were one same branch of the military, which is very interesting. And it was a very short period of time that I was sent to Washington for a little review of intelligence. Many people like Walter Lippmann and other people who thought they knew about spying from World War #1. But it was then I learned that the War Department at that time, Rick, you probably got these figures, but the Intelligence Department and the Public Relations Department at that time in Washington was 28 officers, 4 enlisted men, 49 civilians with a budget of $150,000 a year. Imagine today what that would be. It was something, yeah. But in any event, my commander, do you want me to go out into Iceland?
Yes.
Okay. My commander at the post at Sheridan was called to Washington, and he came back in the late spring of 41, which of course we weren't at war yet, with the information that we were to form a task force to go up and into Iceland. And this task force was to be gotten together as fast as we could get it together and go over there into what is then a combat zone to serve along with the British. Because I thought that kind of was an oxymoron. Here the president wanted to keep us out of war, talking about staying out of war and so forth, but here we're going into a combat zone. But we had a little hitch. The year before, the president had tried to get a draft, and he couldn't get a draft through because Congress wouldn't give him one. But he did get a one-year selective service for men. That was allowed. That would be a 1 year would be allowed. And that was a very interesting thing, as a matter of fact, because in the Congress, in the House of Representatives particularly, that was a hard battle to get that 1 year service. And the man that led the fight against it, ironically, was the man by the name of Barney Youngman, who was the congressman from Grand Rapids. Now, it's a very interesting thing because his actions on that helped get us a president in the future. After the war, we all remember that, how he treated us pretty badly in those days. He did treat us very badly in the military. So when we went back go back to after the war, if you don't mind a bit, we got a group of officers and Army, Air Force, Navy, everybody, and we decided that Barney Youngman must be defeated. And there were other people to join us, but we went to work and got Jerry Ford to be our president, our nominee, because of that. That was very interesting. Yeah. So I'll go back now to Iceland. Cold up there. We got the information, but we couldn't get together enough of a body to form a task force because of this 1 year. So we had to take regular troops, but apparently to satisfy Churchill and Roosevelt, they sent up a brigade of Marines until we could get it together. And eventually we were able to get all regular Army troops, complete Army regulars, so that we relieved the Marines could go back home, which they did. After a while, of course, when we first went up there, because the Marines were there, and General Marston of the Marines met our commanding general, and he walked in a very brave way and said, "Welcome, General." He said, "But I don't know who's in command up here, you know." And my general says, "I'll tell you who's in command. I am." And he meant it, and he proved it. So we were the Army, and the Marines were relieved of it after a while. But it was an interesting tour in Iceland because the British were up there. They had a fine group of military people. They were the men that got out of Dunkirk, that terrible war up there in World War II. But we weren't up there too long, as a matter of fact, and the British general asked us to witness one of his exercises. They were going to have an exercise of, we had them in America too, where they simulate an invasion of somebody and you're going to counteract the invasion, you know. We did that in America, and rather placid and nice maneuvers for a while. However, the British asked us to witness theirs, and we went over with the staff over there to witness it. And we got over there, and lo and behold, the British were simulating an invasion from Norway into Iceland, and they used live ammunition. We didn't hear this, you know. I thought it got good nuts, you know. The artillery was shooting overhead, bullets were flying everywhere. And I looked at my general; he's all completely white, you know. I'm sure we were all pretty much the same way, you know. And everything went along about for 5 or 10 minutes, whatever it was, and all of a sudden it stopped just like that. And the British General Curtis, let me watch this. It's tea time. Now, Rick, I mentioned that, Rick, I found out that in your talk that you were much more mellow in your talk than you were with your snaps. He gave me some good snaps. Well, anyway, Iceland was kind of an interesting thing because in reality what we did know was, from intelligence, that the Germans had prepared a task force up off Norway to invade Iceland. And it would have been a pretty sorry mess had they done so, because there's a picture of me, as a matter of fact. I went over to Iceland, as others did, with World War I helmets and a lot of World War I stuff. And the Germans had a beautiful task force up there. They had 3,000 men in Norway, about 12 divisions, and they were gathering with the task force. They had the battleship Tirpitz and the battle cruisers, Eisenhower, 2 of them, and a lot of aircraft. And we were watching them assemble and heard about their code names, that they were going to come after us. And just as they were about ready to do that, Stalingrad broke, and the Russians were just tearing the Germans to pieces. So they take that task force away. So I'm saved. You know, we all saved. You know, so they didn't invade us at that time. But it was an interesting tour because, for instance, way up in the north of Iceland, away on the Arctic Circle, was our main outpost of a city known as Akureyri. And one day the Germans came over and bombed Akureyri. And I called up and wanted to know what's going on. So I said, oh, it's a terrible thing. They bombed here and there's bodies all over the place. Well, I said, give us an account. What's going on? He said, well, they bombed the cemetery. And good job. And I took it back to the really good intelligence officer we had, was a British commander. He'd been intelligence for a long time. And we thought about it, studied it out. So there's something wrong about that, you know. So they sent some reconnaissance over there in Norway and up and down the street, and they found a German entrance that was going with trucks going into a cemetery. And sure enough, underneath that cemetery, they had storage for bombers and bombs, I should say. So they took care of that apparently. So little things of intelligence, that sort of thing, worked out very well. But after a while, we got into war by this time. We're into war, so that I had to stay up there for about a year and a half, I guess. And then I came down, was ordered down to London. And I was assigned to the intelligence division, but reassigned intelligence to the G3 for operations for the invasion of the continent. That was headed up by General Morgan, a British general who was the chief of staff of the British Army. And they had prepared very much all the necessary ingredients to make an invasion. It had done so for a long time, and they had it down very, very nice. Some of our people were not satisfied with it for the invasion, particularly General Devers, who was there at that time. Eisenhower wasn't there here. And they had reason for it. For instance, we found out that how many boats that might be needed, landing craft, to make this invasion over there. And they were having all kinds of thousands of men going in there without any landing craft. So we sent one of our men over back down to Washington, Major Ingersoll. He had been a editor of a newspaper in New York, and he was very well acquainted with Harry Hopkins and the president. So we wanted more landing craft. The British couldn't give us any because they were making airplanes and stuff for themselves. So Ralph convinced them that if we can have an invasion, if we don't get some landing craft. And the Navy fought us on it, but we finally ended up by getting enough of the landing craft to take care of the division that we thought would land at the time. And so it went on, and then schools of, it was interesting to work into the invasion. They had Lord Mountbatten had a special school up in Scotland, in Lagos, Scotland, that he brought in 2 officers, intelligence officers from each of the places, 2 from Canada, 2 from Australia, 2 from South Africa, 2 from all around, including the British, and 2 Americans, and I was one of the 2 Americans. We went up there and spent time at that school to prepare for the invasions, and it was interesting. I remember that I was contrary on one thing, and that was the fact that I always thought that we should have battleships in the canal channel because we needed that artillery for the troops. We didn't have any artillery. Couldn't have a landing with some artillery, and the Navy men fought it like fury. They were going to put it in their battleships against those coastal guns of the Germans. And so I was through by that time and a lot of other things. But I noticed that when we did go into the canal, that we had a lot of help. As a matter of fact, it worked out just beautifully because we deceived the Germans in so many ways from intelligence by codes and other things and spies and whatnot. How far should I go into this thing?
Well, we actually have another clip of Iceland we can talk about.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So we'll have another clip of Iceland.
Okay.
But before, no, that's fine. These are great stories. Rick, do you want to elaborate just a little bit? Please take the audience back even to those days before the war, before the United States officially is in the war, and the tension. I mean, Roosevelt is trying to get us involved, and yet American public opinion's not there yet.
Yeah, and we talked a bit this morning about preparations and the lack of preparations, and you can see $150,000 or so for an intelligence budget. Today, the United States spends somewhere in the neighborhood of $80 billion a year. That's our intelligence budget now. And intelligence had been undervalued by the U.S. Army, specifically, and the American military generally, unlike the British, who had taken it very seriously. They were very good at it. They put a lot of their best people into it, so that General Montgomery's chief intelligence officer, for example, had been an Oxford Don. He was very capable. His name was Williams. And so as war got closer, there was a recognition that intelligence is an integral part of any war, and a global war requires intelligence of a magnitude that no one had possibly imagined previously. So there was a pell-mell race to find talented young officers like Ralph and put them into intelligence roles. Some of them were newspapermen, lawyers. There was no professional intelligence branch of the Army at that time. Mm-hmm. It was a jury-rigged thing, and It turned out to be pretty good ultimately, but there were some growing pains. On the other point that Gleaves mentioned, yes, obviously when war breaks out in 1939, the President has recognized that war is probably inevitable for the United States. There is a very deep sense of isolationism that runs through at least parts of the United States. It's a serious political issue for a president who's up for re-election in 1940. President who has let people believe essentially that he's going to do everything that he can to keep us out of the war. And so what do you do if you're Franklin Roosevelt? How do you balance the need to prepare for war, to assist your natural-born allies at this point in the Western democracies? France has been overrun in the summer of 1940, so it's really Britain alone at that point. And so Roosevelt concocted a series of initiatives that inched us closer but not into war, and allowed us to assist the British in particular, and after 1941 the Russians. So for example, we had 50 obsolete destroyers. The British desperately needed ships because there was a presumption that the Germans were going to invade Britain, and so we swapped those 50 destroyers in exchange for British basing rights in the Caribbean and elsewhere. That's the beginning of Lend-Lease. And so all of those airplanes and trucks and other war materials that we talked about this morning, in large measure after that, end up going to Britain and to the Soviet Union. And it all started with Roosevelt's belief that we needed to do something to not only prepare ourselves, but to assist our allies.
Thank you. Let's run the second clip on Iceland.
Then it wasn't too long after that we shot down a Focke-Wulf German airplane, a four-engine plane, over Iceland, and it was up in the mountains and near the glaciers. And I had the assignment of take a contingent of men up there to see what, if anything, was recoverable or were the living soldiers, the Germans and so forth. And it took us a couple of days to get up to it, maybe longer than that. It was very difficult traveling in that type of terrain. But I got up there, and of course the Germans were all killed, and I had the remains of everything searched as far as we could, and I found one very important code book, which was extremely important. I didn't realize its importance at the time, although I knew it was a code book, and I took it myself, and after a few days got back down to the base headquarters again, and then we saw that we really had something, because all of the codes of the Germans for the airplanes to the submarines and all sorts of things, here was the German code all handed to us, you know. And when we telegraphed our headquarters over in London, and they got excited, sent a B-24 up and sent me down with the code book, and I turned it over to them, and they in turn, of course, got it to Bletchley Park and other places, and it turned out to be a real boon to the people who were decoding of the Germans, because it told everything it was.
Yes, this is a huge chapter at the beginning of the war, and Ralph plays a pivotal role in it. Now, Ralph, there were spies that were sent to Iceland, and I think you have some interesting stories about them.
Well, we did. We got a couple up there. The first one was Cobweb. We named him Cobweb. In spies, you give them a chance. They can either be hung or shot, or they can work for you. And I find that, as a matter of fact, during the war, the entire war, I bring it up, I think there were 44 enemy agents that came into Great Britain and all over the area there. And out of the 44, there were only, I think, 8 that finally decided they didn't want to be hung. But these two, Cobweb, this was Cobweb at first, and then he was quite willing to work with us, and honestly, they turned out to be very valuable to us. The second one, we decided that Cobweb was so important that he had so much to do with feeding back their headquarters that we didn't need another agent up there, so they sent another agent up there. Beetle this time was his name, Beetle. We give him different names, you know. Cobwebs and Beetle. And we used them very, very effectively, because when the D-Day was to come up, we wanted the Germans to figure that we were going to also invade Norway, because they did have a large contingent of troops in Norway. And we wanted to convince them that we would go on down through probably the Pas de Calais area, and also that we would invade Norway. And so we used these two agents along with the British out of Scotland to convince the Germans that we had a nice big division, reinforced division in Iceland, and some reinforced divisions in Scotland, that we could invade Norway so that they wouldn't be bothering us down in the France area when we were invading. And these two agents are very, very cooperative, and they helped us convince the Germans, their friends, that we were going to do that. Of course, we had hired a corporal's guard up in Iceland by this time, but the Germans didn't know that. They thought surely we had them. Hold on, what did we got?
That's good. No, the idea of these spies going to Iceland and you turn them. And there's also, as you prepare for the D-Day invasion, we think of, there's also another spy, Garbo, who's very important.
Well, Garbo was actually the chief spy for the British for the whole war. He was an absolute gem. He volunteered. He was a Portuguese himself, and he had volunteered to be a spy. Strangely enough, and he turned out to be a marvelous help. Well, you probably know it. He was able to convince the Germans, and we can go into some of the details of what he did. But for instance, he was such a good spy. Now hear this: that the Germans liked him so well, that they gave him the Iron Cross while he was spying for us. And
well, yes, and that's a great segue to the next part of our next clip. But before we go there, Rick, could you please talk about fortitude, this masterful deception? Realize that the amphibious landing in D-Day is the largest amphibious assault in world history, human history. This is an amazing feat. You want to talk about fortitude and the role it played?
Well, code breaking, first of all, is absolutely critical in World War II. And again, the British have a genius for it. The Germans had a code system known as Ultra. They had devices that required setting 3 initially, then 4 different rotors in a certain way every day. And they believed that the codes, which were then transmitted through radio broadcasts, were unbreakable. The British, in fact, had broken them. And continued with eventually American help to break them because the Germans would continue to change and upgrade the codes. So the British had an enormous operation, thousands of people eventually at Bletchley Park, which Ralph mentioned in that clip, in which the radio broadcasts that the Germans were sending from, say, Berlin to a commander somewhere would be intercepted, decoded, translated, and almost instantly, in some cases, sent out to the relevant Allied commanders. It was so secret, it remained secret until 1974. The ultra secret didn't come out until 1974, and no one below the level of Army commander was to be privy to it among the operational commands. And another a related part of counterintelligence and the overall intelligence operation was the effort to persuade the British, as Ralph said, that the invasion was going to come somewhere other than the Bay of the Seine in Normandy. The obvious place would be the Pas de Calais, which is the closest point across the English Channel from England, or to make them think that we were going to do something radical and go to Norway, where there were hundreds of thousands of German troops. And so there was a very elaborate string of deceptions that were set up, known under the code name Fortitude, to persuade the British that the invasion was coming somewhere else. And then, after the invasion occurred, to persuade the British that, in fact, the landings at Normandy on those 5 beaches on June 6, 1944, was just the forerunner of the real invasion, where a larger force...
Yes, persuade the Germans.
Persuade the Germans that the real invasion would come somewhere else, the Pas de Calais in particular. And so it was so successful that the German High Command kept an entire German army in the Pas de Calais area until the end of July. It was not until really around the 1st of August that the Germans began to suspect that, maybe they're not coming here after all. By this point, we have well over 1 million troops, British, American, French, Polish, in Normandy. It's one of the most successful pieces of deception in wartime in the history of warfare.
Ralph, I think you wanted to add something?
Well, no, he pretty well covered it, except the landing, of course. There's no comparison to the bravery of soldiers on the landing on that. And we landed that day in 1 day, 24 hours, 170,000 troops. And we did it with 20,000 vehicles, tanks, armored cars, jeeps, and so forth. And we did with 4,000 landing craft, 1,000 service ships to carry them, and 1,200 warships in 24 hours. I just imagine the logistics of a thing like that. Incredible. And the Americans that day, on one day, we killed 10,000 Americans. That was all. That was taken in life, but it was an incredible thing. And of course, as brave and wonderful as the landing of all of these men and their bravery and fighting, it would not have been possible to have done all of these if the Germans had not been, as you say, convinced that we were going to invade in the Pas-de-Calais area. And we had that deception set up by a fake army under Patton in the southeast part of the Great Britain. And we convinced the Germans that we were going to invade there, and Patton was going to command the whole thing and take it in there. It was all what the British call notional. It didn't exist at all. But we were able to convince the Germans definitely that was where we were going to invade. And thank goodness he didn't, because as Rick said, they had a tremendous army up there in that Pas-de-Calais area. Not only that, but they had 1,000 of the best tanks that Germany has. And they would have wiped us out just like that if we hadn't been able to keep that group in there. And Hitler himself absolutely ordered that we were not to move that army. He told von Rundstedt, and he could not move that army at all until he gave the order. And he didn't give that order until I think it was 9 days later or something like that. And he allowed one division to come out of Norway into fighting. Right? So while we were landing with a very limited number of divisions, we were facing 55 German divisions in that same area. And you can imagine the odds at the time. So intelligence worked a very beautiful work on that. We said that army was to be headed by Patton, and they believed that Patton was going to head the army to go in there. And we would feed them information that what Patton was doing, how he was working the army. Of course, it was all fake. And sometimes we'd say that Patton's giving an address here, and he's there, and what are you doing? And feed it to the Germans, and through our good friend, the spy. And one day, we gave he was going to big talk. We said, "Oh, Patton's giving a big talk at a certain place over there in Great Britain there." And good God, we fit that to the Germans, and here Patton down in London with his dog, you know. You couldn't handle a man. It was just possible to handle that guy, you know. But that's the sort of thing that went on anyway.
Thank you, Ralph. With the success of the invasion, of course, people are going to now start moving through France pretty fast. Just to put that invasion in perspective, it would be the equivalent of landing Grand Rapids in 24 hours, the population size of Grand Rapids in 24 hours. I mean, that gives you a sense of scale. Now let's go to the third clip and Paris.
It was a little bit difficult at that time because while I went into Paris early, probably first to get into there, because I flew in from Normandy on an L5 airplane, a little one-motor job, reconnaissance plane. And the pilot, I was told, I was told anyway by FFI that we could get into Paris, that most of the Germans were gone. And I thought maybe we could get somebody in there, and we had a meeting, and I decided I could get into Paris with this plane. So we took an L5. And the pilot said, well, I have no maps to get in there. I don't know how I'm going to get by there. I have no aviation maps to get into Paris, nor where the landing field or anything else. And what? Well, we looked it all over, and we found out there was a railroad track where we're very close by. That track went right into Paris. So I said, well, I'll navigate, and you pilot. And we followed the railroad tracks into Paris. And the poor guy on the suburb of Paris, we found a place that was, maybe it was an athletic field or something, but it was certainly a nice open ground, and we landed there. And but anyway, I hadn't landed any more than a few minutes. It seemed that the FFA was informed I was coming there, and they met me in their car, crazy bunch of people. I think 5 in that automobile waving flags and banners and all kinds of stuff. They were the underground people, and they met me, and was of course happy to see some of the first Americans they'd seen. And they were going to take me back into Paris, and we rode into Paris in that car. I suppose we hadn't gone any more than a couple, 3 miles, and I heard a bang. I thought, oh boy, they caught us. They know we're here. The enemy sure does. They're after me, you know. After us, and we went further, and another great big bang, and I got very nervous. They saw I was nervous. They didn't appear nervous, but I was nervous. Then they explained to me that their automobile wasn't using gasoline. It was some kind of a charcoal engine that they had for the automobile. And it backfired and made big spurts about every several miles, you know. And I was quite relieved by that.
Well, you had quite a few interesting experiences in Paris, Ralph, and I bet, just getting the gauge of this audience, they'd like to hear about the brothels.
Oh dear. Well, oh dear. That's a very sensitive subject. So, we had been in Paris too long, and the Colonel Calvert, chief of the counterintelligence, said that they had some information that some of the girls working in the brothels had been pretty much indoctrinated by some of the Germans, and they might be going back and forth. Some information would be passing around, and so forth, and maybe we ought to do something about that. And I said, well, maybe we ought to look into it, you know. We did. So
Somebody had to do it.
it's quite a scene, I must tell you that. In any event, there didn't seem to be too many of them, but enough to get the Calvert and all the rest of them excited and something. So bucked up a piece of paper, went on up to headquarters to de Gaulle, to saying that we ought to close them up. So we closed up the brothels of France, all of France, and for your information, that law later on, a woman member of the Parliament of France had it continued as a law, so it was only about 10 years ago they reopened the brothels. I'm the least popular man in France.
And just a little time later, you were studying some maps, you were looking at the order of battle, and you made quite an inference based on the intelligence you were gathering in anticipation of a great German offensive. Please talk about that.
Well, I suppose this is a real failure of intelligence. You get so used to, as Rick referred to it, Ultra was such an invaluable piece of information, because sometimes it actually happened that Hitler would give orders to his generals, and we sometimes knew it before the general got it. That it was such a valuable Ultra, as we call it. It told us everything. And suddenly, Ultra was quiet. And my people at the order of battle, that's the military. Order of battle means the placement of the enemy, exactly where they are, what they're doing, and so forth, at the order of battle. And they noticed that there were big gaps all of a sudden. The Germans, there were some gaps in the line. And where were the Germans? What were they doing? And I was suspicious that something was up, because all of a sudden, Ultra dried up. Everything dried up. And these divisions were gone, and something bound to happen. I thought about it. And a very good friend of mine, we'd been together in Iceland, and he was a very, very, very brilliant officer. His name was Bonesteel, Colonel Bonesteel. Brilliant man, became a 4-star general. And he came to me and he said something's wrong, and I thought so too. But anyway, we mucked around with it for a while and talked to a few people, and we were wrong, because no Ultra said anything about it. So I was fortunate enough to be overseas for, nearly 4 years then. So I had the opportunity to go back to the War Department and find out, because Christmas time, and find out what was happening over there. They didn't think anything particularly was going to come to advance, and that's what. Then the bulge broke, bango. So it was an unfortunate thing that it did happen because it was a failure of intelligence to properly prepare for it. And the bulge was a horrible thing. Patton came in and kind of saved the day a little bit, but maybe you'd comment. I don't know where you were commenting at all, but.
Well, it was a colossal failure of intelligence.
Yeah.
Sounded like you tried to do your part, Ralph, but there had been so much reliance on ultra. You're reading the enemy's mail on a daily basis. You're reading the most intimate military orders on a regular basis. And you become, if you're not careful as an intelligence officer, excessively reliant on that one mode of intelligence, whereas a good intelligence officer is looking for an amalgamation of sources, everything from aerial photography to captured soldiers, German soldiers, to perhaps your own spies. And in fact, there had become such a reliance on ultra that if ultra didn't tell you that it happened, it never happened. And so when Hitler began insisting on this great counteroffensive, which we call the Battle of the Bulge, it came to him in September. He began planning intensively in October. By November, it was set in stone. And the most stringent security measures were imposed on Hitler's orders. It was worth your life if you divulged anything about the preparations for this great offensive. And consequently, they weren't talking in the air, as they say in the intelligence business. There were not radio communications, and therefore there were not radio messages to be plucked out and decoded by ultra. And consequently, despite the fact that there were some other indications of odd things happening on the other side of the line, at this point, we're basically along the German frontier in Belgium and in Luxembourg. The portents were largely ignored by most of the American and British senior intelligence officers. And so when the attack came at 5:30 in the morning on December 16th, it came as a huge surprise. And it was catastrophic for many. There was an entire division, the 106th Division. 2 of the 3 regiments were destroyed. 70,000 Allied or American casualties in the Bulge. And it was 6 weeks before the line was restored. The Germans' intent at Hitler's order was to drive all the way from the Belgian-Franc border to Antwerp. Antwerp was the most important port in France, in Europe, because of the fact that it was capable as a huge port of supplying all the bullets and fuel and so on that you needed to run this enormous war operation. And so Hitler's ambition was to get to Antwerp, cutting off the British in the north and the Americans in the south, disrupting the operations at Antwerp. Well, they didn't get anywhere close to Antwerp. They never got out of Belgium. But still, they made 60 miles. They got almost to Liège on the Meuse River. So it took us until really the 3rd week of January to push them back out of the Bulge. The battle's named after, if you look at a map, you see this salient that they've created. It looks like a big bulge in the American lines. And it took until well into January to push that bulge back out and to begin the operations again that ultimately lead to the end of the war in May.
Thank you. I think now when you consider how the Americans, after recovering from the Bulge, start to move east again, Ralph is part of this effort. He's in the vanguard in the search for Hitler, and he stumbles upon something. Let's roll the next clip.
The Germans had little satellite concentration camps that they put women in, you know. And we ran into one of those. It was like a huge big barracks, and they were full of women. So we went into those women, and I went into that place. The women, they were just crazy to see us, you know. One of them grabbed my hand so much he just kept grabbing, scratching. She made my hand bleed, you know. I carried that for a long time, but they had those camps where they put different prisoners in there. I don't think anyone can go through 4 years of overseas war without having viewed probably the worst parts of that war. I think probably being the early arrival into the concentration camp at Dachau is something that seems to stay with me more than most anything else. I had other events that happened, of course, and that's natural, but in wartime. But somehow this was so so different in life to see that what man can do to his fellow man and what a nation can do to its own people is something that is so great and so profound in memory that it probably is the most vivid event that I do remember out of all of the various things that I've been a part of. It does come back to me very often for no particular reason and no particular time. And I'm not haunted by it, but I'm guided in some things in my life by what did happen there and what does happen.
Ralph, you had the opportunity to see some extraordinary leadership in addition to the failures of leadership. Would you reflect a little bit on some of the generals under whom you served, and some of the people that you came to admire? If you look at Bradley, Marshall, Patton, just a few reflections on leadership.
Well, I certainly witnessed what they were doing and remember the orders that went to many of them and their fulfillment of it. And leadership is Patton was a great general because the men loved him and he fought well. Bradley was supposed to be the man who did the great planning, and he obviously did great things, or maybe not such great things sometimes as some people felt. I think Eisenhower kept a pretty level head about him because he had to keep these things in line pretty well. Remember, as I recall it, Eisenhower actually served under Patton at one time, didn't he? When they were in the tank corps. Mm-hmm.
With him, not under him.
With him, not under him. They served together, practically, and
10 years or 5 years age difference.
if I did, but to have to give orders to a man like that and tell him he can't do it, Patton up until almost the last moment wasn't sure that he was going to command that army to go across that canal, the channel, I should say, and but once he got there, he was a tremendous leader. I know that Hitler made the comment, I think he would trade 5 of his generals, any of 5 of his generals for Patton, something like that, some comment that he made because they thought so much of Patton. They really did. He was a great leader, and I think Eisenhower was really the man for the times because he had to play diplomacy as well as being the general. He had Montgomery over here who was pecking away at him all the time, and he had de Gaulle over here who didn't like anybody anyway, you know. So he tried to put all these things together, and it wasn't easy. And he certainly was able to keep all this thing in balance and keep the military going, and the political aspects of it also. Probably the greatest leader that even he wasn't. I'd only had a couple of occasions to meet him and talk with him. Was General Marshall in Washington. I think he probably was the greatest. If he did in combat, he would be way ahead of everybody. But he was the man behind the throne, so to speak. They got so much done. This was such a wonderful, capable man. And Eisenhower was almost daily reportful. He was going to be sure that Marshall was approving everything he was doing. And Marshall was a brilliant man in every aspect of the war, and probably the great man that led our country through that war as a military man. Best leader of all.
Well, the United States is the only major country that comes through World War II stronger than when it started the war, and a lot of that is due to leadership in addition to other qualities. Let's go to the 5th and final clip, please.
You also must see, though, the things that have remained constant about our country that are good between the 1930s and today. What do you think has been constant through your life?
It's the ability of our people to be innovative. And I think that we have done that. We've been a leader in so many things, electronics and so forth, that we have not lost that spirit. The spirit of entrepreneurship continues to exist. And a great deal of leadership is manifesting itself in some places, but not always in the proper places. But I think that these factors still exist today, and it's somewhat inherent in the spirit of the American people.
What would be your message to young people today to give them hope and to guide them?
Well, I would hope that they would, first of all, really get an education. It's very important that they have a good education. And they really do try to get themselves organized in a way that they think they're going to make the greatest contribution, not alone to themselves, but to their own community and to their country. And be faithful to your religious background if you have one. I think that you find the standards of organizations or whatever it may be that are high in principle, that they can pursue and follow. Be active in your community. Be a contributor to many things, and do it with integrity and happiness.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, those are great words to end on, because Ralph Hauenstein does continue to inspire us at the Hauenstein Center at Grand Valley. One of the things that we try to impress on the students who come to the Peter Cook Leadership Academy is how fortunate they are to have Ralph's legacy of leadership and service to carry forward. And he's the rock star. When he comes into our seminars and our talks, he steals the show, because the students just love to be around him, hear the stories, and also understand those animating principles that have made a difference in his life and his generation's life, and the benefits that we've all reaped as a result of their leadership and service. Thank you, Ralph.
Thank you. Thank you, Rick. Thank you, Rick. Okay.
Well, let me wrap this up as well, and you can just stand if you want. But again, we've been in the presence, I think, of a great American hero with Ralph Hauenstein. Rick and Cleves, thank you for what you've done here in inspiring us, really. And a couple of other great venue here, I think. We can be thankful for those that served us. I also want to recognize, again, Jim and Donna Brooks and Steve Hawks from Fifth Third with their support of this event. Karen, Mary Beth, Nora, Nancy, Nicole, Matt McLogan, Sue Briley were working behind the scenes, and all those back in Grand Rapids. Just recognize them for a second. And finally, one announcement: there'll be a video of these proceedings this morning, this afternoon. We'll get a note out to you. It'll be via the Hauenstein Center's website, and it'll be late in March, and we'll let you know. And God bless you. Thank you for coming.